Welcome back to Tipping Point. I'm your host, Kara McKinney. Did you know that longtime commie Angela Davis allegedly used to date the father of the Fulton County, Georgia district attorney behind President Trump's fourth indictment? Small world, huh? According to the New York Post, the father of Fannie Willis is John C. Floyd III, with whom she's quite close. The now 80-year-old used to be a prominent Black Panther who likened cops in his native Los Angeles in the 1960s to an occupying army, and he used racial slurs like the word cracker to refer to politicians he didn't like. The article goes on to say that, quote, Floyd told the Bradley Center interviewer that he dated the civil rights activist Angela Davis in the late 1960s. She was a member of the Communist Party USA and in 1970 became the third woman ever to be placed on the FBI's most wanted list. Davis was accused of involvement in kidnappings and murders related to the armed seizure of a courthouse in Marin County, California. She was jailed for 16 months amid a huge campaign to free her, which was supported by John Lennon and Yoko Ono, who wrote the song Angela, and by the Rolling Stones, who wrote Sweet Black Angel. Davis was acquitted in 1972 and became a high-profile advocate for prison reform. In a 1974 memoir, Free, she mentioned Floyd twice as chairman of the Black Panther political party in 1968, but did not say if they dated, end quote. If you go back to the history of pretty much any prominent Democrat these days, whether they be Fannie Willis or Barbara Lee or Barack Obama, you name it, you find similar ties to the bloodthirsty revolutionists, many of them Marxists or Marxist adjacent of the 60s and 70s. Just look at the Marxist lesbian head of the American Library Association now saying that public education, libraries need to be sites of socialist organizing. I mean, come on, it's so obvious. And with so many of these revolutionaries or their disciples landing powerful positions at the local, state, and federal level, as well as in all of the major universities and global governing bodies, is it really any wonder how U.S. domestic and foreign policy has become so inimical to our interests? It's almost as if people who hate us and want to make money off the process of destruction have been running the show for decades. So now that we've covered some domestic issues, at least somewhat in Georgia, let's now pivot to how that affects us on the global stage. So joining us now to discuss what she writes about in this article for Georgia Magazine titled, Is U.S. Foreign Policy Fueling a Global War on Christianity? Is Alex Newman, the CEO and president of Liberty Sentinel Media. Thanks so much for being here tonight, Alex.
Great to be here. Thank you for having me.
Great. So talk to us about your piece for the magazine. I know it kind of crisscrosses the world, but let's start with Iraq and the invasion there we had in 2003 that really destabilized the situation for the minority of Christians living there, really wiping them out in some areas.
Yeah, Iraq is really exhibit A in this. You had a thriving Christian community there, numbering in the millions prior to the U.S. invasion. They had survived centuries of invasions from Arabs and Persians and Turks, you name it, jihad, Islam, all of it. And they were still there, and they were still standing, and they were still thriving. And actually during Saddam Hussein's reign, they were able to go to church freely. Many of them served in government, right? So it's not to say that it was a libertarian utopia under the dictator at that time that the U.S. government helped put in, but the Christians were there. They were thriving. The U.S. government invaded. There was basically a genocide there, and I think that's the appropriate word to use here. That community has now been utterly decimated. They're down to maybe a few 100,000. A lot of them fled to Syria, where they were then persecuted by Obama's moderate Syrian rebels. And it seems like the Christians in the Middle East just can't catch a break from U.S. foreign policy.
No, they can. And, you know, it's a strange thing for being a nation that, you know, has largely been Christian since its founding in terms of total population, how people usually see themselves and see the nation. And yet with this mass slaughter, it's almost no one talks about it. It really is such a strange phenomenon. Those on the right are starting to talk about it a little bit more. We heard it from the libertarians for so long. They